Welcome to Future Talk. Our topic today is the global energy transformation as we get closer and closer to being able to produce energy that is clean, sustainable, dependable, and economical. My guest is Lynn Orr, Professor Emeritus of Energy Resources Engineering at Stanford University. Professor Orr is a former Undersecretary for Science and Energy in the U.S. Energy Department. He's also been a leader in energy research at Stanford for over 30 years. And some of his positions there include founding director of the Precourt Institute for Energy, founding director of the Global Climate and Energy Project, and dean of the School of Earth Sciences. Lynn, welcome to the program. Great to have you today.
Thank you, Marty. It's good to be here.
So how close are we to solving this energy problem and having abundant, clean energy that never runs out?
You know, there's no shortage of energy available to the planet. Think of the sun, think of the wind, think of waves, think of hydropower, nuclear power, fossil fuels. We have plenty of energy. It's all about how we transform that energy into services that we can use. And that takes devices that have costs. So we're looking not only to make that energy be available, but also to do it at a price that makes the economy function well and that everybody on the planet can afford.
Now, some people think we should get rid of fossil fuels because they're polluting, but I understand you're actually pretty big on fossil fuels. You've done a lot of work in petroleum engineering, and you see a good future in fossil fuels if it's done right. Could you tell me about that?
So fossil fuels have provided very important services to humanity over the last century and a bit. But it's clear that we also need to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. So there's a transition underway that will, I think, reduce the amount of coal in the energy mix. The natural gas, which has lower greenhouse gas emissions, will play a bigger role. And oil is primarily used for transportation. So to change that part of it, we will need to change automobiles and how they operate. So there's, as I said at the beginning, there's no shortage of energy, but these are big systems. So we have a lot to do to make them cleaner, and we're going to have to stick with this for a while.
Now we have some images that illustrate some of the things we're talking about. Can we see that first image, please? Okay, so what are we looking at here?
Well, this slide just makes the point that that you want to have energy be available to people. You want it to be reliable. You want it to be there when you need it. We also want it to be reasonably priced so that the economy can function well, that energy underpins absolutely everything else we do in the economy. You want it to be secure. You don't want disruptions. Look at what's happened in Puerto Rico, for example. That's not what we want. And we also need to protect the environment, and that means the air quality and water quality, but also greenhouse gas emissions. We humans are a global biogeochemical force now, and we've changed the concentration of greenhouse gases in the atmosphere, and that's leading to climate change that could have bad effects if we're not careful to avoid most of it.
And we seem to have an insatiable appetite for energy. Is there something we could possibly do to lower the demand for energy?
Well, there's a big opportunity in being more efficient in the way we use energy. We in the United States have left ourselves a lot of room to do better on this, I must say. That could be more efficient vehicles. It could be efficient lighting. LEDs now have come down 95% in price over the last 8 or 9 years. So they're inexpensive. They use much less energy than conventional lighting. We could do a better job of insulating our homes. We can buy efficient appliances. There really are lots of things that we can do, and those pay out very quickly and make economic sense to do right now, even as we work on the bigger long-term problems that involve the supplying electricity and transportation and such like.
Okay, well, let's look at the next image. Can we see that, please? Now, what is this showing us? What is unconventional gas?
So you might have noticed that in the United States, at least, natural gas prices have come down a lot. And that's because we have been able to develop shale gas resources. So shales are rocks that are very hard for fluids to flow through. But technologies that involve drilling long horizontal wells and fracturing the rocks next to the wells allows some of that gas to flow into it. So that has increased the gas supplies in the United States quite a lot, and that's reduced the price. This slide just illustrates the fact that there are large resources of this kind of gas around the world. Some of them are not as good as the ones that we have here, but nevertheless,
so I think the orange represents the shale gas.
Yeah,
is
that's
that right?
right.
So it's saying that most of the untapped gas available in the world is in shale. Is that right?
Yes, there is an awful lot. This is the unconventional stuff, so there is some conventional gas that's in the rocks that are more frequently used for this sort of thing, but lots of gas in shales.
Now, what about the risks of horizontal drilling? Could that cause earthquakes or fracturing the rocks that we all stand on?
So when you inject high pressure water to try to make some cracks in the rock, anytime you make a crack in a rock, it makes an earthquake. Most of them are tiny, too small to be felt. But if you happen to do this next to a fault that is kind of ready to move, then you can cause an earthquake that can be felt at the surface. Now, in Oklahoma, for example, they've had lots of earthquakes, but most of those have been associated with disposal of water that came with recovering oil somewhere else. So it was not the hydraulic fracturing that caused most of those earthquakes. Most of it was water disposal. And even there, what you want to do is to avoid injecting water deep down close to faults in what are called the basement rocks that might be stressed, that could move and then cause an earthquake.
Do we know where all the fault lines are so we know what to avoid?
We don't know exactly where they are, but we do know the situations with regard to the stresses, and we can measure those kinds of things when wells get drilled and watch what happens. So in those kinds of settings, you want to restrict the rate at which you inject water, for example, for disposal, and that reduces the probability of an earthquake.
Okay, let's look at the next slide if we could. Okay, now what is this showing us?
So this says something about how our activities as humans contribute CO2 to the atmosphere, or CO2 and other greenhouse gases. And the big overall point of this slide is that if you look at all of the emissions from fossil fuels and our other activities, land use and so on, about half of that CO2 that goes into the atmosphere is either taken up by plants on land or dissolves in the ocean, and the other half stays in the atmosphere. And it's that part that stays in the atmosphere that is responsible for global warming, because those molecules help intercept some of the radiation that all of us emit, infrared radiation.
The greenhouse effect, I believe
Yeah,
they
the
call
greenhouse effect. The sunlight comes in shortwave radiation, and we all radiate back to space in longer waves, and those are intercepted by the greenhouse gas molecules.
I think we have one more slide. Could we see that last slide, please? So this looks like Stanford, so I'm guessing that this has something to do with showing how Stanford is using energy wisely and effectively.
This is very much an example of the kind of efficiency idea that we talked about a minute ago. So Stanford has a big collection of buildings. All year round, we take some heat out of those buildings. We do that with a chilled water loop. But all year round, we supply heat to other parts of buildings or to do various services. So it turns out that if we take the heat that we take out of the buildings in the chill water side, and instead of just rejecting it to the atmosphere, we push that into the hot water side, then we don't have to buy fuel to heat up the hot water side. So we've completely revamped our energy system to take advantage of this. It saves buying lots and lots of natural gas. It saves many tens of millions of dollars over the 30-year life of this project. and it reduces our water use by almost 20%. And this reduces our greenhouse gas emissions from the campus activities by about 70%, 68%.
Now,
So it's a big effect.
Could this be done on a small scale, like a private home, where you capture the excess heat and store it and then apply it against the cold when it's cold?
Storing it, well, you can do that. We do that in some buildings that use big concrete slabs to store cool from the night in the summertime and to store warmth in the daytime. It can be done at the individual house level, but it probably makes more sense at the kind of district heating level that we're doing here at the university.
Now, you recently were employed at the U.S. Department of Energy. You were Undersecretary for Science and Energy. What did you actually do there, and how does the government, what role does the government play with these energy issues?
Yeah, I have to say that nobody knows what an undersecretary is. And I had to learn a few things when I went to Washington. In the Department of Energy, there's a secretary. That was Ernie Moniz when I was there. There's a deputy, and then there were 3 undersecretaries. The one undersecretary worked to be in charge of the nation's nuclear weapons. Most people don't know that DOE owns them and stores them and has to make sure they're stored safely. There was one undersecretary who was responsible for the cleanup of making all those weapons during the Cold War. And then the third part, the good part, was the science and energy R&D, and that's where my job existed. So I looked after the science programs. So these involve 10 of the national labs, like SLAC and Lawrence Berkeley, or Argonne or Brookhaven. The applied energy labs, NREL, for example, or Idaho National Lab, or the National Energy Technology Lab in Pittsburgh. And the programs that were in the applied programs were in energy efficiency and renewable energy, fossil energy, nuclear energy, and a part of it that dealt with the modernization of the grid. And then the science programs involve things like high energy physics and fusion and basic energy sciences. So it was a big, wide range. It was a great job in the sense that I had this mandate to stick my nose into all kinds of interesting research. I worked on the budget. I worked on figuring out how to coordinate activities that needed to stretch across the whole department. The grid modernization, for example, involves plenty of fundamental science, but also applications as well. And that kind of reflects the sort of area where I think the government role is appropriate. Government support for fundamental science is an absolutely essential part of our world leadership of science. And on the applied energy side, we should be working on the early stage stuff that needs development before industry can take it over and make it fully commercial. So there's a portfolio of activities, and my job was to think about what should go into that portfolio.
So if you received 100 research proposals and you have to pick maybe 5 of them to go ahead and fund, so you decided which ones are most likely to produce good results?
Yeah, partly. The budget here was about $10 billion, so I didn't do individual proposals. But what I did do was to work on the priority setting amongst the various programs, and then they have grant competitions for university research, or even ones that could involve companies as well, where they do all that ranking and so on. But I didn't do that personally.
So do you feel that the government has the right sense of urgency about this? Is this an urgent problem? Some people talk about it like this is urgent, climate change, we've got to fix this right away. Other people are a little more relaxed in their attitude towards it.
Well, I do think that the problem is a serious one that we have to address with vigor. But we should also remember that these are big systems, so it will take a sustained effort over a good period of time. Think about, for example, as a parallel, the 1960s, when we were beginning really to work hard on air and water quality. In the intervening 50 years, we've made huge progress, but it's taken time to do that. We're really talking here about changing the world's energy systems to be much cleaner than they are now. And given the scale of them, we'll have to keep developing things for a long time. But there's been huge progress. If you look at the costs of areas like wind and solar, the wind prices are down by 50%, solar by more than that over the past 7 or 8 years. So huge progress on all of that. You can see steady growth in those in the deployment of those technologies, but it will continue. We'll need to continue that over an extended period as we go forward.
Now, what about nuclear energy? It was popular in the early days of the atomic era, but it's fallen into disfavor. We've had meltdowns. Also, there are toxic byproducts that take thousands of years to become neutralized.
Yeah.
Do you think nuclear energy has a future, or will that be superseded by things like solar and wind power?
Well, nuclear has the advantage that right now it's about 20% of our electric power generation in this country. And it doesn't really have any greenhouse gas emissions except for making the steel and concrete that go into the plants to begin with. So it's an important component of our energy mix. I think it should stay in as a part of a diversified energy system. The nuclear plants in some settings are having a hard time competing on price because it's cheaper to generate electricity with natural gas or with wind or solar. That's been a problem for coal as well. So part of what we're seeing is a set of market transactions. Nuclear provides baseload power, which the wind and solar, which are intermittent, don't do as well. So there's a variety of situations. Now on the sort of medium-term front, there's work going on small modular reactors. These are reactors that are smaller than the big 1,000-megawatt reactors. They don't involve investment of such a huge amount of money. There's one of them that's in the midst of the design certification review now, but it's still going to have to work on cost to make sure that it can compete in the marketplace of the future.
Because one of the issues, aside from earthquakes and things like that, is that you generate these waste products that take thousands of years to decay. Yeah. And can you just bury them in metal barrels and hope that nobody disturbs them for the next 10,000 years?
Well, we do have to sort out how to do this. We have some examples. The Waste Isolation Pilot Project in New Mexico is a place where the wastes are being stored in salt beds that kind of squeeze around the containers of the waste. You've heard all about the controversies involving Yucca Mountain. One of the things that we worked on at DOE when I was there was to try to create a new consent-based process to figure out appropriate sites and to build acceptance of in the surrounding communities. That has seems to have ceased with the change of administration. So there is definitely still a waste storage problem that we have to figure out how to deal with.
Now, what about solar power? That seems like the most obvious source because the sun always shines somewhere.
Well, about half the time somewhere.
Okay, but it seems like
day and night, of course.
I mean, it's a virtually inexhaustible source of energy, and it's clean.
Yep.
But are we able to? Do we need some kind of breakthrough to extract more energy from it to make it more economical?
You know, the most recent bid prices in sunny places have solar competing head to head with, for example, a new natural gas plant. So in Colorado recently there were bid prices for wind and solar that were really quite competitive. And so I think we've come far enough, and as the costs continue to come down, there's lots of interesting research on improving efficiencies and reducing the costs and reducing the amounts of toxic materials that are sometimes used in solar cells. So lots of progress and lots of research going on. It's an area where I think there's a lot of exciting work still to be done.
We're making much progress storing electricity because electricity usually has to be used as soon as it's generated, so you can capture sunlight all day long, but it's hard to store that and then use it whenever you want, unless we get better batteries than we use today.
Yeah, energy storage is, Well, it's something we've been doing for a long time because we use hydroelectric power. So the most efficient way to store electricity is to use it to pump water uphill, and then the next day when you want to use it, the water comes back down and generates electricity. You can get round-trip efficiencies that are close to 90%. That 90% of the energy you put in to get it up there, you can get back. Batteries don't do that well, but battery costs are also coming down, and particularly as we get to scale with regard to electric vehicles, I think you'll see significant advances there as well. So that's a system where you need different kinds of storage. You need some storage to help take out the very short wiggles that a wind turbine might produce, other storage for an electric vehicle, and still more for doing the day-night, winter-summer kinds of things. So there again, you want a diversified system, and storage has an important role to play.
Now, do you think solving this energy problem is purely a technical problem, or is it also a political problem or a financial problem? Is there resistance to getting cleaner energy?
Well, markets really do matter, and costs matter too, because we supply and use energy as a commodity, and the margins are thin, and there's lots of competition, and there's a big existing incumbent system that would like things to stay the way they are. So the structure of markets matter. We need to have, for example, electricity markets that value energy that's available, that's reliable, that for which there's enough capacity to meet the peak demand, that is able to recover quickly when some sort of natural disaster strikes, that's secure and resilient. And right now the market is structured in such a way that it's largely based on the cost of dispatching the next bit of power generation. It doesn't necessarily take into account all these other capacity kinds of things that support voltage and frequency and other services. So we do need to work on that market structure, so that's partly a political issue as well. But we also need a good diversified energy R&D portfolio that will provide us with some new tools to reduce our impacts as well.
Are there national security implications for this? So, for example, if some other country gets ahead of us in energy generation, are we threatened by that? Well, do we need to keep a lead?
Yeah, economies that use energy efficiently, that control costs, that have it reliably, those are going to be economies that compete well in the world marketplace. So I think there's an important reason for us to try to lead the world in clean energy R&D. It wouldn't be a bad thing to sell that to the rest of the world as well. And we also there are definite security interests in for example, cyber protection of our energy assets as well. And there's some more work to be done there. A lot of work has gone into that, but there's more to do.
So you're optimistic that the problem can be solved, at least in the technical sense. We can supply all our energy needs relatively cleanly, solve the problem of global warming?
I am optimistic. We humans are incredibly inventive when we make up our minds to do so. I think we have a way to go on making up our minds to work on this as hard as we need to. So there's more to do, and we have to be willing to stick with it over an extended period, because even if we had complete agreement on everything we wanted to do, the capital investments are pretty big, and so we would need to do this over time. So we just need to work hard on this and stick with it.
Now, do you find that energy researchers like yourself have the resources you need? You are provided with the funding and equipment you need to maximize your potential, like the resources is not the bottleneck?
Well, you're asking a university guy, and
you always need more money.
We can always think of exciting things to do faster than we can figure out how to pay for them. But I'm reasonably confident. So far, the Congress has been willing to stick with the R&D side, recognizing that it's our place in the world is really fundamentally based on the quality of the educational and R&D system that this country has had. It relies both on universities to middle-sized companies to big companies as well, and that spectrum working together can keep us in the lead if we invest appropriately across that portfolio.
Now, there are a lot of different potential energy sources. One energy source is conducting heat from the interior of the Earth, because
Right.
the inside of the Earth is hotter than the surface. Is that something feasible, like sinking a heat tap into the Earth and just drawing up that heat? Can
Yeah,
that
those are geothermal resources, and in California we actually use geothermal power quite a bit. The geysers is a geothermal field. There's a fair amount in Nevada as well. There's R&D underway to try to extend the fraction of the Earth's crust that we can take advantage of that heat. And even just in the more mundane level, the just basic heat pump. You know, at Stanford we use these big heat pumps for our heating and cooling system, but you can do that sort of thing at your house as well, where you use electricity in effect to move heat from the ground into your house. How effective that is depends a lot on the price of electricity.
We only have about a minute left. Any last-minute comments, things that I haven't thought to ask?
Well, I think you did a good job of asking. The big question is how do we move forward? And I would just say again in closing that, you know, there is a huge opportunity space. There are huge markets around the world, and there are huge benefits to be accrued if we make our energy system cleaner than it is now. And we should just work on that as hard as we can. It's full of good jobs. It's full of challenges for smart students. Opportunity that we should seize and move forward.
And I think that's a good note on which to wrap. I'd like to thank my guest, Lynn Orr, Professor of Energy at Stanford University, former Undersecretary for Science and Energy at the U.S. Energy Department. Thank you for watching. Visit our website, www.futuretalk.net. For Future Talk, I'm Marty Wasserman, and we'll see you next time.